أعوذ بالله السميع العليم من الشيطان الرجيم من همزه ونفخه ونفثه بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على رسولنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه ومن والاه. So today's seconds are: how are you? How was your week? And how did you grow over the past week or month? Did you learn any capital T truths? How did you feel after learning those capital T truths? So we're gonna go to the next slide, inshallah. And that one is, I added a few more questions at the bottom, and these are: how do we know something, but what do we know? What do we not know also, right? Because there are certain things that we are going to be able to confirm. The videos that we're going to watch today are going to go into a little bit about science and so on. So what are things that we do know and we can know from this perspective, right? From these things that we're talking about, not necessarily from wahi or from revelation from Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala, or like, from the Prophet said, I'm telling us certain things, right? But what do we, like, when it comes to science and so on, what can we know, and like what do we not know, and what can we not know based on that stuff, and or whether it's like we can't know it right now or later on, whatever it might be. So think about that, inshallah. And then just to review transformation, we're talking a lot about transformation. A lot of the stuff we're talking about is transformation. Like we're learning about capital T truths and how does that impact our life and our experiences and so on. How does it impact how we look at the world, how our lives are filled with contentment or not, and like how do we go towards these things. So some things to keep in mind. Okay. And then now we're going to go to some brain games. Now with the brain games, we're going to start off with, wait, there. Okay, the video is here. So this, it's more exploration this time. It's not necessarily trying to figure out what the animals are doing. In this case, we're focusing on just learning about something.
Ignore that skip ad. Stories from nature, we explore the mystery of how ants farm and milk aphids. Never in 1,000 years would you expect ants to be devious masterminds of nature that have turned the odds of survival in their favor. Every spring, usually when weather is cool and wet, aphids, the bane of every gardener, show up on plants like kale, Swiss chard, and Brussels sprouts. They find the juiciest specimen they can find, build a colony, and go to town sucking the juice from the plant. Luckily, this colony aspect ends up with a few of the gardener's plants being wasted and not the whole crop. If the plant becomes overpopulated with aphids, like you can see here, they'll develop and grow wings and fly over to a new plant and start a new colony. But the ants have a different idea. These clever little characters are able to lift up to 5,000 times their own body weight, have a different special ability, not their super strength, which is used in the domination of the aphids. Never would you expect such a bizarre and devious thing going on in your garden, but ants use chemicals on their feet to tranquilize and subdue aphids, which allows them to harvest them for food. New research shows the chemicals in ants' footprints will not only tranquilize but inhibit the ability for aphids to regrow their wings. Now, we already knew that ants use the chemicals on their feet to mark their territory, but ants will also mark leaves or a stalk of a plant. And as the aphids land on it, they'll become tranquilized, to which the ant will march over and clip their wings, preventing their escape. The aphids, almost acting zombie-like, get to work sucking juice from the kale, filling their body with honeydew. This honeydew is then excreted by the aphid when the ant strokes the back of the aphid, to which the drop will appear. Quite frankly, this looks like it's coming out of the butt of the aphid. Nature is weird. After reviewing the footage closely, the ants will either drink the sap directly or collect it on their front appendages and later drink it off their arms. The honeydew aphids produce will become the primary source of food for the ants, with the odd whole aphid thrown in there as a meal to mix it up. It's possible the aphids are allowing this or are okay with being under the ant spell, as the ants will fight ladybugs that try to eat the aphids. Ants will move them around to the best plants to provide the most amount of honeydew and will move them to shelter when it rains, potentially into their own nests. This honeydew is liquid gold for the ants. On closer inspection, it appears the ants battle each other briefly for dominance of who gets first dibs of the dew, with the other ants relying on the scraps. The ants spend all day going from one aphid to the next, drinking up the dew or tending to their army of aphids. Aphids are born pregnant, so when a new baby pops out, the ant will get them into place so their new worker can start drinking and they can milk their dew. Daily rounds of clipping wings are done and the cycle starts all over. Have you heard of something in nature as bizarre as this? Share your thoughts in the comments down below. Hope you enjoyed this video. Why not check out another video on the channel, and until the next.
All right. So, ants milking their aphids. There's a book by Dr. Omar Ashkar. And so Dr. Omar Suleiman Ashkar, he wrote the series, the Creed series, and then he actually mentioned this particular aspect of the aphids and so on, and the ants and the aphids in his book. So if somebody wants to look at that, but it's interesting because he was mentioning about how Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala designed these communities, these mini communities, these small, I guess micro worlds, if you may. And how they work and stuff and so on. So he mentioned this as an example. And if you think about it, like these ants have their own aphid farms where they're milking these aphids and stuff for their benefit. Like we have cows and stuff and so on. So they have their own herds of aphids essentially. So that was just a way to just kind of think about something. In the meantime, let's go to the next thing. And now it's your turn. So last time we talked about this scenario. Do you have anything to talk about today? And you can pick from one of these, or you can come up with your own things, and then we'll go from there. So any scenario that you want to talk about. So remember, the idea is over here is to look at a particular situation and try to figure out the how, the why behind it, and so on, like brainstorming certain situations. So this is kind of going from going about navigating different contexts, and you might bring a situation, and we can explore it together, and then we can go from there. So this is just something you look at the world, just like we were looking at if you remember one of the first days we were talking about the whole knowledge thing, how we acquire knowledge and how science works and so on. We had the picture of the rainbow, and we were talking about the sheep and the rainbow and so on. Where did the rainbow come from? What does it look like and stuff, right? So the idea was just kind of how does knowledge get acquired, and how do we figure out from it capital T truths and so on. So in this case, that's the idea here. We want to look at a situation, anything. It could be any kind of a current event. It could be current problems in the world, anything. And then we try to figure out the how, what, why, where, and stuff and so on, and try to figure out how to navigate that situation. And so this is replicating the new stuff. Okay, so the last time we had these slides, or this slide as the last time. So the causes over here were potential causes. What could be the reason, right? So this is like us guessing the capital T truth. So this is a set of lowercase t truths, one of which may be the capital T truth, meaning whatever the actual cause is. Or it may not be. Maybe we weren't able to brainstorm some things. This is similar to the discussion, or this is related to that discussion when we talked about how we are whatever we're exposed to. That's the set of stuff that we can pull from in terms of figuring out what could be happening in a situation, or how what are the possibilities. So if we don't have something in mind, we haven't been exposed to it yet, we may not be able to use that as a possible, we might not be able to think of it obviously to use as a possibility. But if we have been exposed, we'll come up with that as a possibility. And then current dynamic, what does it look like right now? Again, this is our projection, or this is our our thought process of what could be happening at the moment. And then some of the solutions, again, lowercase c truths, trying to figure out the capital T truth about what actually is going to help this person. Could be one or two, like one or more of these things, or it could be none of these things. But this is just our perspective on it. So these are our lowercase c truths, but we're trying to figure out what the capital T truth might be. And this is how a lot of things work, right? And then the limitations would be what we think might be the limitations again. Whether they are limitations or not, we might not know. Okay, so then there's possibilities here. Or it could be something that you come up with yourself. Go from there. If you don't have something, that's okay too. If you have something, we can do it. And then if not, maybe you can think of it and then come up with it at the end, or you can come up with it next time. So it's up to you.
I can't really think of anything right now.
Okay. And this could be about anything. It could be about personal situations. It could be about work-related stuff. It could be about like vacation-related stuff. It could be about programs that you want to start. Maybe like a message that you go through. Whatever. It could be about anything, or any like a health concern, for example. It could be about family dynamics. It could be about like how stress managing something, for example. It could be about so many different things. But if you can't think of something, no problem. We can come back to this later, or we can do it next time. It's up to you.
What about the problem of someone who is overweight and they understand that it's not healthy, but they're having a hard time actually, they have the knowledge, but they're having a hard time losing the weight?
Okay, so how would you phrase that as a problem statement?
Well, as a statement rather than a question.
So is this person trying to lose weight, but they don't know how to lose weight?
They can't find the motivation.
Oh, okay. Lack of motivation. But they know they need to lose the weight, right?
Right.
Okay, so is that right? As a problem statement?
Yeah.
Okay, so the question is now, what could be causing this? So we're brainstorming what could possibly be causing this lack of motivation. Because they want to, but they have
they're happy with their current activity level.
Okay, so they need to lose weight. Do they want to lose weight?
Say that again.
So they know that they need to lose weight, but they want to lose weight.
Right. They think they want to lose weight, but they're not motivated to put in the work.
Okay. They're not motivated to. Okay, so what is, based on this aspect right here, the last part, they want to lose weight. That's different than they need to, right? If they want to lose weight, in that case, what are the causes of them not having motivation? So this is a case of ambivalence. A person is sort of in the middle. So you said, let's say current dynamic would be like happy with, okay.
Yeah.
Causes of the lack of motivation. What causes them not to be motivated? I guess this could also be something that we could put in the causes, because it can also be it can be a condition like a current dynamic, but it can also be a cause, because their happiness is sort of like making it so that they are not motivated enough.
Right.
So it could be both. It could be a condition, but it also could be, the condition could also be causing the thing, or further causing. Yeah. Okay.
Right. Let's say a cause could be laziness. If you don't get up, and you put the work in to cook the right food, or.
So let's focus on this aspect, the lack of motivation part.
Okay.
The laziness would be because they're not motivated.
Right. Okay. They don't have a goal.
Okay. Yeah. No.
A goal. Yeah.
Okay.
Maybe they don't see progress as quickly as they want.
Okay. So
as quickly as they expect.
okay. Slower than expected. Okay. Maybe not slower than expected.
Yeah, maybe their understanding of how to lose the weight is not exciting, like the types of food or the activities that they have to do.
Okay, so so diets, there is this thing about diets, where diets are not necessarily like, so they actually did, so one of my courses that I was taking for fitness, right? They had mentioned in there that the diets pretty much, like, you can have any diet in the world pretty much, generally speaking, and it has pretty much similar, implications and stuff, and they have similar theory behind it and so on. And so they compared different diets across the world and stuff, and they found that there wasn't really any significant difference between the end effect and stuff. It was just a matter of the fundamental that they were focusing on, which is like eating healthy stuff and like wholesome foods and so on, exercising and things like that and stuff, right? So that was pretty much the biggest driver in terms of health and fitness goals and stuff like that. So sometimes maybe like a person is like trying to follow a particular diet, and it's like saying that you can only eat this and that and stuff, and that's it, right? And that's very restrictive and stuff. So that can also be very unappealing. But if you, for example, you just need to eat wholesome, and eat to your portion and stuff, and you can eat whatever you want, more or less, as long as you're eating wholesome food and you're not eating junk food, and as long as you're exercising. So that's a little bit easier to navigate than saying, no, you can only eat these specific foods and you cannot eat this much, or whatever, you have to count your calories and stuff, right? So they were actually training us not to get people to like count their calories too much and stuff, because that can be daunting. But ultimately, you just kind of like give them guides of like portion sizes. For example, your palm, the size of your palm times 2 of protein for males, and then the size of your palm of protein for females, right? And that was like sort of like a per meal kind of estimate that you could do. And if you're eating like 2 or 3 meals a day and stuff, right? So that's sort of like the estimate that you can have for protein. So if you're having at least this much and stuff, then you should be good and stuff, right? Or like about this much. So the good thing with that is that you can, take your palm everywhere you go. But whatever food that you eat and stuff, you're not gonna have to sit there, pull out a calculator, and try to figure out how many calories this is and so on, right? So they were saying like it's a little bit easier for people to navigate this, and it's a lot more effective then because it's less daunting to people. So the more you remove obstacles from people's paths in their goals, then the easier it becomes for them to actually go towards them. But if they have to do a lot of tedious effort and stuff, right, be very meticulous about things, and that can be very daunting and stuff, and so people are just not gonna do it. And they had like your thumb size for like fat. If you want any kind of like fat, of course, like should be healthy fats and stuff. But like it could be like also like nuts and stuff, right? So about the size of your thumb, times 2 for males, times 1 for females. So this was just like an estimate that they were giving. And they said, obviously, if you're a bigger person, you're gonna have bigger palms, and if you're a smaller person, it's gonna be a smaller palm. So that kind of works out, So it's like you don't have to worry about like exact numbers and stuff, but it's like the palm sort of like the palm size is based on your size of and so on. So it's like a little bit more effective that way.
That's actually a good point because I've heard people say that, well, I'm bigger, so I need more. So, yeah. Good point.
Yep. If anybody's interested in these courses and stuff, it's the International Sports Science Association. So if you want to like go through that and stuff, then they have multiple different courses there. Okay, so let's say these are some of the causes and stuff. Are there other causes that people might have? Or do you want to go to the current dynamic? So obviously there's a lot more that we can think of in terms of possibilities. Maybe, for example, cultural norm, cultural and societal norms. Maybe like peer group, job. So you can see, like, you can keep on going with so many different things. You could say, for example, money, access to resources, inability to.
Would that affect motivation?
Which one?
The last. I
The
guess it would. It would definitely, yeah.
yeah. You can also say, for example, presence. Like
Yeah, very easy to stop and get fast food.
Yeah.
It has very little nutritional value, but a lot of calories.
Yep. And also, if you have a lot of this kind of junk food lying around in the house, like if it's really accessible, like if you have, imagine if you have like a bunch of like junk food, like really nice, tasty junk food, sitting on the kitchen counter, or maybe it's like sitting on the table where everyone just kind of passes by a lot and stuff, right? So and it's open. It's not even like you have to open the bag and stuff. It's just sitting there, just waiting. It's calling your name and stuff, right? So these are like very appealing. So actually, this course was also telling us like how to help people. Actually, there was multiple courses. One of them was also specifically a nutrition course. And so they were saying things like, for example, having access to these things so easily makes it a lot more difficult for people to say no, because they also mentioned another course about what they call like motivation. So like it's like self-control, and these things are limited. There's a limited resource. So your ability to stop yourself from doing things or motivate yourself to do things and stuff can be limiting and stuff, right? So for example, they were talking about how, for example, Mark Zuckerberg from Facebook, he wears only he wears the same colored t-shirt and jeans and stuff every single day and stuff, right? And so the idea was that if he doesn't have to sit there in the morning try to figure out, try to make a decision on which ones to wear, right? Then it saves his like these particular resources in terms of decision making, so for whenever he has to make the bigger decisions and stuff in life, right? Or like in the things that he's doing in his company. So he's not using that resource for these like insignificant things like what clothes he should wear for that day, right? So that was his way of kind of navigating that. So it makes it obvious. So like if you have your willpower decreasing, then you need some time to replenish it. So if you have like all this junk food sitting in front of you, and you came from a hard day's work or whatever and stuff, right? You've already exhausted your willpower for the most part. So now you have this junk food sitting there, and you're like, you know what? I'll just take some, right? But if it wasn't accessible to you and you have to go through extra steps and extra hurdles to be able to get it, then it makes it a lot more difficult for you to get it. So if you had to go buy it from the store and then like come home and all that stuff, right? Then it would be a lot more hassle. And so you would probably not do it because your willpower would have to be required to get you to the store in the first place, right? So these are things that I'm pulling from there, by the way. Just ran like all these. I'm just consolidating all the stuff that came from the things that they were mentioning in there. So these were among the things that they mentioned, which causes people to not have motivation or find it hard for them to lose weight and things like that. Okay, so there's a bunch of more stuff that we could put in there, but for now, let's just skip over to this. What does it look like right now? Maybe the person doesn't have a peer group. So that's one of the things that they mentioned, that if you don't have a strong peer group, like a support system that motivates you and stuff, right? Peer group that is not encouraging or is discouraging. Because you can have that too. Like you can have people that are picking on you for like being overweight, that can actually like, make you feel more depressed, as opposed to encourage you, right? So there's an encouraging way of telling people how to, or helping people get, into the mindset of losing weight. But there's also a very discouraging way of like pretty much pushing people away from that, or kind of making them feel depressed and stuff. So they actually start eating more, like stress eating or whatever. So that's something that can happen too. And what else could it be? What else could be happening right now that might be impacting this? Again, like causes and current dynamic can be similar.
I guess they could have a lot of stress in other areas of their life and they just don't have enough energy.
Okay, stress. Okay.
Maybe they just don't, their lack of knowledge is just another step in the process of.
Okay, so lack of knowledge or misinformation.
Yeah. That can be discouraging.
There's a lot of things that we can look at this. In the meantime, you guys can keep thinking of current dynamics. Let's also think of some solutions and some limitations.
I would say solutions might be a simplified process of getting the information to them. They have those apps. Develop a support system.
Yeah. Important people relative to the person themselves.
Right. Just do an inventory of their, I mean, if somebody's going to be helping them, just try to find out what they do know, what they don't know, what they consider to be healthy, what they don't consider to be healthy. Maybe like have a partner for exercise. that's always motivational.
You know those speeches that people hear sometimes, like, you know, the motivational speeches that do. I know a friend who was like, who do like, you know, heavy lifting and stuff, and I guess like going towards bodybuilding, and like that person was like lifting really heavy and like doing a lot of workouts and stuff. So he told me like he was like always listening to like these motivational you know, speeches by these like, you know, bodybuilders and stuff like that. So that was something that was helpful for him. Okay, what else? You can do an inventory of diet. So like we do a 3-day meal plan, not a meal plan, but just like a log. So like a log of inventory or inventory log diet. So you know we do 3 days. You could do like somebody could do more, and which is like we have the client just record all the details about like what they do and stuff. Okay, or what they've eaten for that day and stuff, or for 3 days. And I think could be, for example, as in like, so like where is the food located and stuff, what kind of food is out and about, how is the food being stored and so on. If it's, you know, just left outside and it's easy for people to just go and grab the food, or if it's kind of like sealed and put away and stuff and you have to heat it up and stuff, and all that, you know, hassle can like pretty much become obstacles, and so the person might find it harder to get to that food, and so it makes it a lot harder for them to actually eat it and stuff. So that's something. But if you have very easy access to it, then that makes it difficult. Okay, anything else? And in the meantime, we can also do limitations. So what are some limitations? Here, support.
I would say like physical limitations, like if you're exercising a lot, you know, your muscles can't handle too much at one time.
Injuries. Okay.
They could live in a home where they don't control the food that is brought in.
What else? What are some other limitations?
Yeah, just stress from job or home or school. Yeah.
Okay, so you can see like, you know, what we're doing over here. Now, all of these things that we brainstormed, And of course, you can go add more details to these things. I just wanted to kind of give a sampling over here. So the idea is, how do we address this, right? It could be that they have fake information that they've been exposed to, for example, right? And that's why they're not motivated enough, for example. Or maybe that they feel like they've learned, maybe they have a learned helplessness. So that could be like, for example, something that can be mentioned over here. Learned helplessness, they tried in the past. I think we actually mentioned that. Yeah, up here somewhere, something like that. But it'd be like learn helplessness a bit more. Like every time I tried, it doesn't work and stuff. I'm just a failure and stuff like that. Or maybe the people have said that to them so many times. Ultimately, the idea is like we are brainstorming. These are our lowercase t truths trying to project, trying to figure out the capital T truths in a situation. Okay, so the idea is that this is how life works. We are trying to figure out capital T truths. We guess, we try to figure out, we have educated guesses. We try to come up with whatever could be happening and stuff, and then we try to come up with solutions or, kind of go along with that. But then at the same time, we acknowledge there are limitations. So if you look at studies that are done, at the end of the studies, they'll give you, like, for example, conclusions, but they also mention in there some limitations of the study, right? So that's very important. So sometimes people don't understand that, like they look at some studies and they just try to like say that this is how, everything is going to work and stuff. They try to extrapolate from it. But in reality, the study authors are often going to tell you, okay, well, this is the limitations of the study actually do not allow us to expand to, outside of the, the scope of this study, for example. Or outside of the lab that we were investigating this, or outside of the conditions that we tested under, and so on. But a lot of people may not read the limitations. This is very important to understand that capital T truths are really hard to identify by ourselves like that. So with that in mind, let's go ahead and look over these. And that's it. After this, inshallah, we'll be done. But these are the last two things that I'm going to go over today.
Crash Course Philosophy is brought to you by Squarespace. Squarespace, share your passion with the world. You probably think you know a lot of things, but do you know what it means to know something? We've spent quite a bit of time discussing beliefs and knowledge, but we haven't really been specific about what we mean when we talk about those things. Thankfully, philosophers love a good definition. They have very specific and lucid ideas in mind when they use terms like know, or believe, or proposition, or justification. And about 10 minutes from now, you too will know what you're really saying when you use those words. So just because these terms have been defined doesn't mean that philosophers aren't still arguing over them, because, that's how philosophers do. Their definitions might seem kind of obvious at first, but the more you think about them, the more nuanced they turn out to be. Like, is having knowledge of something the same thing as being correct? Or if you believe something to be true and it is true, does it matter if your belief in it is justified? And can you be right about something without really trying? Answer to these weird questions and more await you, as well as cats. You've heard this already. Philosophers love a good argument. But you've figured out by now that philosophers argue in a different way than like kindergarten kids or internet trolls or other people who confuse arguing with sniping back and forth or just thinking up witty comebacks. Nope. Philosophers have all kinds of rhetorical devices at their disposal that they can use to advance an idea or call into question the ideas of their interlocutors. So in order to hold your own in a philosophical debate, you're going to have to know the difference between two things that sound like exactly the same thing: an assertion and a proposition. And you'll need to be able to tell when someone actually knows what they're talking about, or if they just believe what they're saying might be true. For example, the sentence I'm saying right now is an assertion. An assertion is a linguistic act, either spoken or written, that has a truth value. And despite what it might sound like, truth value isn't a measure of how right something is. It's just the state of being either true or false or indeterminate. All declarative sentences have truth values. Declarations that assert something about the past or present are either true or false. And assertions about the future are indeterminate, at least when they're expressed, because no one knows if they're right or not yet. For example, I'm going to assert that this cat will pee on my desk before the end of the show. That assertion has a truth value, but it's indeterminate because the show's not over yet. We're just going to have to wait and see. Now, all this contrasts with other kinds of linguistic acts like questions, which don't assert anything. This is a cat is an assertion, as opposed to is that a cat, which is a linguistic act, but not an assertion. But the substance of what you assert has a name too. The content of your assertion is your proposition. It's the underlying meaning of what you're saying. So even though an assertion itself can change depending on say what language it's spoken in, its meaning doesn't change just because its outer packaging does. Like, this is a cat and este es un gato both assert the same proposition. And a proposition is true if it asserts a claim that corresponds to reality. The proposition, when I assert this is a cat, is true if the object of the this is in fact a cat, and false if it is anything other than a cat, like this is a cat. It's worth pointing out that attitude counts too when you're asserting something. A speaker's mental state toward the proposition they're making is their propositional attitude. If I say, like, this is a cat, but I actually believe it to be a rat and I'm trying to fool you, then philosophers would say that I have a propositional attitude of disbelief. Whereas if I think I'm speaking truthfully, I have a propositional attitude of belief. And of course, you're not going to get very far as a philosopher unless you understand the classic definition of belief itself. Based on the lingo you've learned so far today, belief is just when you take a propositional attitude of truth. I believe that this is a cat if I think it's true. That is, if my attitude is that the assertion corresponds to reality. And even if I'm wrong, even if there were an aardvark on my desk, or if there weren't a cat on my desk at all, which there isn't anymore, if I really thought there was a cat on my desk, that would just be my belief. My propositional attitude, in other words, is what determines if I have a belief. What all this means is that I, like everyone else, can have false beliefs. Simply thinking something doesn't make it correspond to reality, which is what's needed for truth. But of course, the fun of arguing is showing off what you know to other people, or at least producing really clever evidence to support your case. So this raises the question of what it means to actually know something in the philosophical sense. The traditional definition of knowledge is that it's a justified, true belief. Note that there are three separate components here. So I have knowledge that this is a cat if I first believe that it's a cat, and also it must in fact be a cat. That is, my belief corresponds to reality and is therefore true. And finally, I can be said to have knowledge about the cat if my belief is justified, meaning I have some sort of legitimate evidence to support my belief. Now, we've already defined truth and belief. Justification is simply evidence or other support for your belief. If you remember back to episode 2, you will recall that premises offer justification for conclusions, and justification can come in a variety of forms. Most often, it comes about through testimony, just taking someone's word for it. Not all testimony is strong or trustworthy, of course, but if it comes from someone who is an expert on the topic in question, you might consider the testimony to be reliable. And the fact is, most of what you know about the world, you learned through testimony. You took your teacher's word for it when they were teaching you stuff, and the same goes for every book you've ever read and every news report you've ever seen. They're all just forms of testimony, which you accepted as justification for your knowledge and your beliefs. But justification can come in other forms too. Another common type is first-person observation, information you acquire through your senses. If I believe that a cat is a cat because I already have robust and well-informed beliefs about cats, then having had extensive experience with them in the past, I'm identifying the cat as a cat through my direct contact with it. It looks, feels, acts like a cat, ergo cat. But philosophy wouldn't be any fun if the key to knowledge were that easy, right? Until American philosopher Edmund Gettier came along in the 1960s, philosophers were in pretty widespread agreement about the definition of knowledge, that it's justified true belief. Because you can believe any old thing, but in order to know something, it just makes sense that you also have to have evidence for your belief, and it must be true. In other words, you can have a false belief, but you can't have false knowledge. And if something you thought you knew turns out not to be true, then the fact is you never actually knew it, you just believed it. And likewise, you might happen to hold a true belief, but if you don't have any justification for it, if you just accidentally happened to be right, which happens sometimes, that doesn't count as knowledge either. Enter Edmund Gettier. Gettier wrote a short but fabulously influential paper that turned the standard understanding of knowledge upside down. He did this by proposing what have come to be known as Gettier cases, situations in which one can have justified true belief, but not knowledge. Which brings us to this week's Flash Philosophy. Let's go to the thought bubble. Here's one of Gettier's original cases. Smith and Jones have both applied for the same job. The president of the company told Smith that Jones will get the job. This counts as evidence. The president of the company would seem to be a reliable source of this information. Meanwhile, Smith counts the coins in Jones's pocket and sees that there are 10 coins in there. Smith then forms a belief based on his first-person observational evidence of the coins as well as the testimony of the company president. He comes to the belief that the person who gets the job has 10 coins in his pocket. But it turns out the testimony of the president was false, and it's Smith, not Jones, Jones who gets the job. And it just so happens, unbeknownst to Smith, that he also has 10 coins in his pocket. So Smith has a belief that the person who gets the job has 10 coins in his pocket, and that is justified because he counted Jones's coins and the president told him Jones was getting the job. And his belief also turned out to be true. The person who got the job did have 10 coins in his pocket. However, neither pieces of justification actually pointed Smith to the right answer. The president's testimony was wrong, and the 10 coins that he saw were in Jones's pocket, not his own. So it seems Smith simply lucked into being right. Gettier argued that we now have a case of justified true belief that is not knowledge. As he pointed out, you don't know something if you simply stumbled into the right answer. Thanks, Thought Bubble. The philosophical world was turned upside down by this idea, and philosophers, loving a good counterexample, began generating their own Gettier cases. American philosopher Roderick Chisholm proposed this one. Looking across a field, you see an object that looks like a sheep, and you form the belief that there is a sheep in the field. It turns out that the object you see is actually a dog. Yet there is also a sheep obscured from your vision by a hill. So you have a justified true belief, but the justification for the object that you saw is not a sheep. You just lucked into being right. Once you understand how it works, it's pretty easy to generate Gettier cases of your own. And many philosophers today think Gettier successfully destroyed the justified true belief definition of knowledge. But even though the 1960s might seem long ago to you, remember, philosophers are in the business of having millennia-long debates about stuff. So it shouldn't surprise you that the philosophical debate about this is still raging. But if knowledge is not justified true belief, then what is it? Next time, we will look at one possible answer. In the meantime, you learned about some of the key concepts we use when discussing belief and knowledge. You learned what defines an assertion and a proposition, and that belief is a kind of propositional attitude. We also talked about forms of justification and the traditional definition of knowledge, which Edmund Gettier totally messed with using his Gettier cases. And the cat did not pee on my desk because the cat was unable to spend any time at all on my desk. So it turns out the assertion that I made was false. But it is a true assertion that this episode was brought to you by Squarespace. Squarespace helps to create websites, blogs, or online stores for you and your ideas. Websites look professional. I got this crazy idea. I thought,
Crash Course Philosophy is brought to you by Squarespace. Squarespace, share your passion with the world.
imagine being alive when Albert Einstein was developing his theories of relativity, or witnessing the birth of psychology as Sigmund Freud and psychoanalysis took over the scientific mainstream. The early 1900s was an amazing time for Western science. There was another figure on the intellectual scene when these great minds were at work. Young philosopher Karl Popper was born in Austria, Freud's home turf, but built his career in Britain, giving serious consideration to the new ways that these and other scientists of the time were thinking about the world. And after looking at different methods that people like Einstein and Freud were using, Popper came to an understanding that not all scientific achievement was created equal. He ended up making an important distinction between science and what he called pseudoscience. And in the process of doing this, he taught us volumes about the nature of knowledge itself and how we can best test it and challenge it to bring us closer to the truth. Emerging at roughly the same point in history, Freud and Einstein both made predictions that they hoped would help us better understand our world. Freud, concerned with the individual psyche, predicted that our childhood experiences would have a heavy bearing on who we grew up to be. Meanwhile, Einstein waited patiently for a solar eclipse that could disprove his entire general theory of relativity, depending on what it would reveal about how light travels through space. And then there was Karl Popper, born in 1902, who grew up to observe these predictions with keen interest. As a young scholar, he learned about the psychoanalytic theories of Freud and attended lectures given by Einstein himself about the rules of the universe. And he noticed that these great thinkers used different methods. For example, Popper observed that Freud was able to make just about any data point work in service of his theory. Freud could explain a person's intimacy issues, both in terms of not being hugged enough as a child or in terms of having been hugged too much. Meanwhile, almost any behavior on the part of a female could be explained in terms of penis envy. Evidence to support Freud's theories seemed to be everywhere. But Popper saw that Einstein was making a different type of prediction. Instead of looking backward and using past data to predict the present, he was looking ahead and predicting future states of affairs. Einstein's theory was truly risky, Popper realized, because if the future didn't match his predictions, then his theory would be conclusively disproven. If the results of the solar eclipse in 1919 had been different, general relativity would have been finished. Freud, on the other hand, could always just read the past differently so as to maintain some kind of confirmation of his theory. Suddenly, Popper understood the difference between the science that Einstein was doing and what Freud was doing, which Popper rather snootily referred to as pseudoscience. Now, whether psychology today is considered a hard science or a social science or some other kind might be debatable, but you won't find many mainstream thinkers who consider it pseudoscience. But still, nearly 100 years ago, when Popper was reaching these conclusions, no modern philosopher had really characterized what science truly meant and what the implications were for the pursuit of knowledge. The traditional understanding of the scientific method, going all the way back to the ancient Greeks, relied on the belief that to look at the world with a scientific eye is to observe with no preconceived notions. You simply look, see what you see, and then develop hypotheses based on those observations. So you look at a swan, and you notice it's white. You look at another swan, it's white too, and you look at enough white swans, and eventually you hypothesize that all swans are white. This is what Freud said he was doing, observing relationships. But instead of it being the relationship between swans and their colors, it was between particular human phenomena and human behavior. But Popper argued that everyone has preconceived notions of some kind. We all start out with a hunch, whether we admit it or not. After all, what you decide to observe is determined by what you already care about enough to observe in the first place. And the fact that you care about it so much means that you already have some beliefs about it. So, what does that tell us about Freud? Popper became convinced that methods like his that only served to confirm beliefs were pseudoscience, and they could be used to prove anything. Consider the existence of Santa Claus. If I try to find evidence of Santa's existence, I'm going to find it easily. The world is filthy with evidence of Santa Claus. There are presents under the tree on Christmas morning, there's the guy at the mall, and then there are all those songs and stories and TV shows and movies. They combine to confirm your belief in Santa. But Popper would argue that it's only by seeking to disprove Santa's existence that you can demonstrate his unreality. So the question is, when we begin to test a theory, are we looking to confirm it or to disconfirm it? This is the key point. For Popper, science disconfirms, while pseudoscience confirms. He elaborated on this insight by establishing a series of distinct conclusions about science and knowledge. First, he said, it's easy to find confirmation of a theory if you're looking for it. Remember the presents under the tree? If you're looking for proof that Santa exists, you're not likely to keep searching for contradictory evidence after that. Second, confirmation should only count if it comes from risky predictions, ones that could actually destroy your theory. Because Popper observed that every good scientific theory is prohibitive. It rules things out. This might sound strange because no one wants to be wrong, but Popper says that every false belief we discover is actually good, because that gets us that much closer to believing only true things. Next, Popper argued that the only genuine test of a theory is one that's attempting to falsify it. So if you were to test for Santa's reality, your method would require you to try to prove that he doesn't exist, rather than proving that he does. So you stay up all night waiting to catch him to bring his presents. This is risky, because if the person who actually shows up to put presents under the tree is your dad, then you've destroyed the Santa hypothesis. On a very similar note, Popper also pointed out that irrefutable theories are not scientific. If it can't be tested, then your theory doesn't have much value. Like, you can only confirm that Santa is real by doing everything in your power to prove that he's imaginary and then failing to do so. So you need to be tugging on Santa beards at the mall, you need to investigate reports of Santa sightings and other weirdos caught breaking into people's houses through their chimneys. If you want to be able to really trust in your belief in Santa in a genuinely scientific way, you need to put your belief to the test in every way you can imagine. This is where Popper says that you have earned the right to call a theory scientific. And finally, once you've disproven your theory, Popper said, you need to be willing to give it up. I mean, you can still cling to the Santa myth even after you catch your dad putting gifts under the tree by accepting his lie that Santa had dropped the gifts off earlier and that he was just helping. But if you're a scientist, you're going to have to be willing to let your beliefs go. Accept the evidence. Move on. And this is the modern scientific thinking that we accept today. Testable, refutable, falsifiable. You don't seek to prove scientific hypotheses right, you only prove them wrong. A lot of this might seem so obvious that maybe you're wondering why we're even talking about it, but that's how right Popper was. He was one of those rare philosophers who actually managed to hit on an idea so right that we don't even really argue about it anymore. So it sounds like I've been talking mainly about science all this time, but Popper and his insights also tell us a lot about knowledge in the philosophical sense. For Popper, knowledge was about probability and contingency. We are justified in believing whatever seems most probable given our current data, and we should always be willing to revise our beliefs in the light of new evidence. In other words, our belief should be contingent upon the data themselves. This would not have satisfied Descartes, who was always concerned about certainty, but Popper never thought that certainty was possible in the first place. If anything, he thought being certain of something causes you to close your mind, and that's not what we want. Always remaining open to the idea that your current beliefs might be wrong is the best way to get closer to the truth. So where does this leave us? Remember, we started out trying to prove that we know the things we thought we knew, but you have to be open to the idea that your beliefs might be false, because that's the only way that holding on to them can really mean anything. Otherwise, we're all just believing whatever we want with no grounds for adjudication between beliefs. Just to keep that in mind, because that's the name of the game for the rest of this course. You only get to believe the things you have reasons for, and we're going to start with the area that is hardest for most people, God. Hope to see you there. Today, you learned about Karl Popper and his insights into science, pseudoscience, and knowledge, which might best be summarized as science disconfirms while pseudoscience confirms. This episode of Crash Course Philosophy is made possible by Squarespace. Squarespace is a way to create a website, blog, or online store for you and your ideas. Squarespace features a user-friendly interface, custom templates, and 24/7 customer support. Try Squarespace at squarespace.com/crashcourse for a special offer. Crash Course.
All right, so this is the end of this, and inshallah we're gonna continue. That should have been number 8, I mean. Okay, so we're gonna pause here, inshallah. We're gonna stop here, so we can also break for Maghrib, and next time we'll continue and discuss about how knowledge works and how it relates to understanding capital T truths and so on, inshallah. So with that, I'm gonna go ahead and close. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت أستغفرك وأتوب إليك